Today, Ghost Stories Vietnam will share a story based on my own experience working part-time during my college years. This story is titled The Female Ghost in the Milk Tea Shop. If I remember correctly, it happened during my freshman year at university. Back then, I had a lot of free time since first-year students didn't have heavy coursework, so I looked for a part-time job. I noticed a milk tea shop that was about to open and applied for a position. The shop primarily focused on takeout orders. The shop itself was extremely small. The upside was that its size helped the owner reduce rent expenses. On the grand opening day, it was incredibly crowded. The storefront width, if I recall correctly, was only about 2 to 2.5 meters. As for the layout, entering from the outside, the staff's preparation counter was on the left side. Continuing straight down the left side, there was a storage room. Next to the storage room was an open space where we kept extra plastic stools and various store equipment. Beyond that open space were 2 restrooms. The peculiar thing about these restrooms was something I noticed from my very first day. The owner's design for the men's restroom was quite standard. It had a small mirror to check your face and was lit by a regular white neon light. However, the women's restroom right next to it was slightly more spacious. The owner had generously installed a full-length mirror for the female customers so they could see their entire reflection. But oddly enough, the light in the women's restroom was a warm yellow bulb. Because of this, every time anyone stepped into the women's restroom, it felt significantly dimmer and gloomier than the men's. Among our co-workers, there was a guy who was 2 years older than me. You could say he possessed a spiritual sensitivity or a sixth sense. He was extremely receptive to supernatural phenomena, and if a place was haunted, he could easily perceive it. Fortunately, the grand opening went smoothly, and business was booming. This continued until one day during the afternoon shift, which ran from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Since it was a quiet afternoon with few customers, only 2 staff members were scheduled. I was working inside the counter as the barista, while the spiritually sensitive coworker I mentioned earlier was working as the server, standing outside the counter to hand over drinks to customers. One important detail is that the restrooms were located on the same side as the preparation counter. Therefore, while standing inside the counter, it was impossible for me to see the restroom area. Only someone sitting outside facing me, where a row of waiting chairs for customers was placed, or a staff member standing out there could see the hallway leading to the restrooms. In front of the 2 restrooms, there was an interior door connecting our shop to the adjacent house. If I remember correctly, that day was a Sunday, so the neighbors had locked that door from their side. No one should have been able to pass through, and normally, they never did anyway since our businesses were completely unrelated. During that quiet afternoon, a female customer came in to buy a drink. She sat down on the waiting bench directly opposite me, waiting for her order. When I finished preparing her milk tea, I passed it down to the counter for my coworker. He bent down, focusing on placing the drink into a plastic carrier bag. As he was doing this, I noticed him suddenly freeze, look toward the restrooms, and jump back in sheer terror. He dropped the drink entirely. The customer seemed to have noticed his bizarre reaction, so she asked him, "Is something wrong? Did you see something?" Right there, in front of both the customer and me, he stammered, "Oh my God. I just saw a woman walk straight through the locked connecting door over there and go into the women's restroom. I saw her clear as day. She was wearing a traditional purple babie shirt. Looking at her scared the absolute soul out of me." Upon hearing this, the customer fell completely silent. Since the original drink had dropped and spilled, I quickly made her a replacement. After she left, I asked my coworker for details, and he swore that was exactly what he saw. I am someone who is terrified of ghosts, so hearing his story gave me instant goosebumps. Even though he was used to seeing things, he was visibly shaken. His voice was trembling and stuttering, consumed by genuine fear. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and called the shop owner. He said, "Mr. Luan, while I was packing a drink just now, I saw something terrifying. You need to come down here and check it out, I'm freezing with fear." The owner replied, "Okay, I understand. Let me call the landlady." When he called the landlady to report what the staff had witnessed, do you know what she said? She simply remarked, "That lady doesn't like yellow lighting. Just change the light bulb to a different color." She only said that much, neither confirming nor denying the existence of a ghost. This indifferent response made us even more terrified. Soon, all the staff members found out about the incident, and everyone became incredibly jumpy. Starting that very day, the owner brought in an incense burner and placed it in the storage room. The storage room was tiny, and he set the burner all the way up on the third shelf. The next day, I was scheduled for the afternoon shift again. Another coworker was running late, so I had to open the shift entirely by myself. Because of this, I only dared to stand huddled at the edge of the counter closest to the main entrance, staying as far away from the storage room as possible. Suddenly, the owner walked into the shop holding a box of broken rice with grilled pork. He walked straight into the storage room, opened the food container, poured the fish sauce over it, and offered it as a ritual sacrifice to the entity. I had initially hoped he was coming in to sit and keep me company, but instead, he offered the food and then stood there in an eerie, solemn silence. He then turned to me and said, "Keep a close eye on the shop. That lady prefers to stay inside the storage room, so you kids should limit how often you go in and out of there." About half an hour after he finished the offering, I remember it was only around 2:30 p.m. I had to go into the storage room to fetch some sugar. I accidentally glanced at the box of rice, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. The rice looked as though it was coated in a strange, slimy film and smelled incredibly foul and rotten, exactly like leftover rice that had been left out for days. It looked deeply unnatural, and at that moment, I knew for sure. However, as a barista, my job required me to constantly enter and exit the storage room to check inventory at the beginning and end of every shift. The female staff members were particularly terrified. Whenever I worked the evening shift and happened to arrive a bit late, I had to rush into the storage room to finish my tasks quickly. There was nowhere else to go, and sitting or working near it filled me with an intense sense of dread. It was psychological torture. Every single time I stepped into that room to check inventory, I felt a heavy sensation, as if an invisible pair of eyes was intensely watching my every move. Following these events, every single employee in the shop became aware of her presence in the storage room, though no one knew the underlying story. A long time passed until one day, the shop owner finally had a chance to have a deep conversation with the landlady. She finally revealed the truth. Years ago, a woman lived in this house. She was actually the owner of the property back then. At the time, she was pregnant. However, due to severe conflicts and marital breakdowns with her husband's family, she fell into a deep despair. Consequently, she slit her own throat and committed suicide right inside what is now the women's restroom. The landlady added to comfort him, "Her spirit isn't malicious. Now that you all know she is in the shop, just pay your respects. Offer her prayers and food daily, and she will bless the business and won't harm any of you." From that point onward, the staff had to make offerings during every single shift. A bizarre pattern began to emerge. Before this, I had never once burnt a batch of tapioca pearls. But after the haunting became known, on any day the staff forgot to make an offering or made it late, the tapioca pearls would inevitably burn. When cooking tapioca pearls, especially brown sugar pearls, you have to stir them continuously, otherwise they stick to the bottom. On shifts where the offering was neglected or delayed, without fail, the pearls would stick, burn, and completely ruin the pot, leaving us to scrub it half to death. Even though the entire staff was plagued by fear during this period, the shop was doing incredibly well financially. The pay and benefits were great, and the team was very friendly and close-knit, so none of us wanted to quit just yet. Eventually, the owner decided to appoint 3 shift leaders from among the staff to manage operations. Being the youngest, I was surprisingly selected as one of the shift leaders. The responsibilities included managing the staff on our shift, staying later than everyone else to lock up, ensuring all appliances and lights were turned off, and most importantly, burning joss paper, ghost money, and offering food to the female spirit at the end of the night. On the days of the full moon, we had to prepare much larger, grander offerings. Strangely, on the days we made lavish offerings, the shop's sales would skyrocket. One day, it was time for my shift. The day before, another shift leader had been on duty. Our manager had explicitly warned all of us beforehand. If you are going to offer fruit to her, you must buy external varieties. Do not use the fruits that our shop uses for business. Because our shop sold milk tea and fruit tea, we kept a large stock of high-quality fruits in the refrigerator, including imported Australian oranges, apples, pomegranates, and kiwis. For some reason, that particular shift leader was either lazy or careless. Instead of going to the market to buy different fruits like dragon fruits or pears, he took the oranges and pomegranates straight from the shop's commercial fridge to use as the offering. When I opened the refrigerator to start my shift the next day, I was shocked. The oranges were covered in black spots, completely rotted, mushy, and hollowed out from the inside, despite being a fresh batch bought from the supermarket just the day before. Then I checked the pomegranates. When I opened them up to extract the seeds for drink decoration, the seeds inside looked as if they had been forcefully crushed by hand. They were slimy, decayed, and dripping with foul water. When I asked the manager about it, he explained the cause. He called the other shift leader and chewed him out. The guy just excused himself, saying, "I didn't know, I just grabbed whatever was there to offer, I didn't think it mattered." He got heavily reprimanded for that. Sometime later, the shop hired a new store manager. He was highly capable but had a rather frail and thin physical appearance. One afternoon, around 3 p.m. during my shift, he went to inspect the restrooms to make sure the trash had been cleared. While I was busy working at the counter, I suddenly heard him scream in terror. He ran out to the counter and collapsed, fainting right on the floor. At first, I thought he was just suffering from low calcium or exhaustion, but after he regained consciousness, he told us what happened. When he opened the door to the women's restroom, he saw a woman standing in front of the full-length mirror, staring at her reflection. He froze in shock for several seconds. Looking closer, he realized she had no feet, she was floating completely off the ground. The sheer terror caused him to faint on the spot. By this point, her presence was an absolute fact to everyone. While we were scared, the senior managers advised us that since she wasn't actively harming anyone and was helping the business, we should just continue our rituals. They strictly warned us not to call any shamans or exorcists to disturb her, as it could backfire. For a while, I tried to block it out and just focus on my work. However, that same reckless shift leader, the one who had offered the shop's fruit, went behind everyone's back. He secretly asked the landlady for the deceased woman's name, date of birth, and personal details so he could bring an exorcist to the shop to banish her spirit. He knew the landlady would never agree if he told the truth, since the spirit was tied to her and was actively helping the business. So, he lied to her, saying, "Ma'am, please give me her details so I can go to a temple and pray for her soul to find peace." Because this guy was close friends with a Taoist master/shaman, he actually brought the master directly into the shop to perform a ritual to forcefully evict her. When our store manager found out, he was furious. He was deeply spiritual and terrified of the supernatural consequences. He warned us during a coffee break, "Mark my words, that idiot is going to face a severe spiritual backlash for provoking her." From that day on, whenever I worked the closing shift, the dread intensified. I had to stay back alone, check all the lights, and walk down to the supply cabinet right in front of the women's restroom to gather rice cakes, joss paper, and ghost money. Then, I had to go outside to the front of the shop to burn them and perform the daily ritual. Because I handled the closing shift frequently, it was always around midnight when I finished my core duties, followed by the ritual, meaning I wouldn't get back to my rented room until 1:30 a.m. It began to take a severe toll on my mental state. I was constantly living in paranoia. The ritual required preparing distinct plates, one for small rice cakes, a second for the joss paper, and a third for a bowl of porridge. After arranging them, I had to step out into the pitch-black street, light the incense, and plant the sticks into the roots of the tree in front of the shop. Doing this alone in the dead of night, followed by arriving home so late, left me completely traumatized and consumed by fear. It all culminated on a particular night. I had finished the late-night closing shift and the ritual as usual, and returned to my room. Before I could even wash up, I pulled out my textbooks to study because I had a crucial exam at 6 a.m. the next morning. The head of my bed was positioned right against the window, which I always kept tightly locked and shut. It was about 1:30 a.m., and I was deeply focused on studying. As I sat there, a sudden, overpowering odor breached the locked window and flooded my nostrils. The smell was distinct and unmistakable. It was the exact, heavy scent of burning incense mixed with the acrid stench of burnt joss paper. It was thick, foul, and seemed to pierce straight into my nose. I froze in a state of absolute shock. I couldn't comprehend what was happening, desperately trying to rationalize if my mind was just playing tricks on me because I was traumatized by performing the ritual every night. While I was trapped in my thoughts, the electric fan sitting at the foot of my bed, which had been operating completely normally, suddenly let out a violent bang. The fan blade shattered completely, snapped off, and flew directly into my arm, slicing a deep gash into my skin. Blood poured out, and that wound left a permanent scar that I still carry on my arm to this day. The very next morning, I submitted my resignation and never went back to that shop. Looking back, during that period of my life, I used to hang out late at night at coffee shops with my group of friends, which included that spiritually sensitive coworker. In the next episode, I will continue to narrate the terrifying encounters we experienced while hanging out together. What do you think about this story? Please leave your comments below to let me know. Bye-bye.